So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to everyone. I'm Mark Davidson. I serve as the Executive Director of the Voices for Justice in Palestine. I'll be moderating our webinar today. Have an exciting panel with Omar Barghouti and Abby Martin, Jeff DeYo, and Nushin Framke. We'll introduce them all to you in just a few minutes. But first, I want to take this opportunity to thank the three main organizations who are our co-sponsors for this event: Joining Hands for Justice in Palestine, Israel, Friends of Sabeel North America, and Voices for Justice in Palestine. We'd also like to thank the following organizations for their support: the Palestinian Christians Alliance for Peace, Friends of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society, the Georgia chapter of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, and the Israel-Palestine Mission Network of the Presbyterian Church USA. On behalf of the Voices for Justice in Palestine and Dr. Burhan Ghanayem, chair of our board, and on the whole board's behalf and members of the Voices for Justice in Palestine, let me say how excited we are to co-sponsor, to partner with Joining Hands and FOSNA to bring you this webinar today. Voices for Justice in Palestine is based in North Carolina. Our mission is to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people in their struggle for freedom, justice, and equal rights. I turn now to Sarah Humphrey for a word of welcome from Joining Hands. Sarah is chair of their board. Sarah.
Yes, and welcome everyone. And I bring our greetings from our committee, Joining Hands. We are an organization here in Atlanta. We have been here for about 20 years, again, advocating for the end of the occupation and the apartheid Israeli government. We educate, advocate, and for more information on our work, you may go to our website, jhjpi.com. And if you'd like to support our work, you may also donate on site. Again, thank you to our speakers. We really appreciate your being here and look forward to your words of wisdom and how we can be advocates. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Last but not least, in the intros is Jonathan Brenneman. Jonathan will bring us a brief word of welcome from FOSNA, and Jonathan is also our tech support for today's webinar, and we'll have a few pointers for participating in today's webinar. Jonathan.
Hello all, good to be with you today and send greetings from Friends of Sabeel North America. We're very excited to be co-sponsoring this and to be able to support by running the tech for the Zoom webinar. I wanted to first start out by pointing out that this is also being shared live on Facebook, and the recording will be available there, both on Voices for Justice in Palestine's page, on the event page, and on FOSNA's Facebook page. So there's many places where you can find the recording and share this with your friends. I also wanted to just take a second to invite you all to FOSNA's event 1 week from today at noon Eastern, that we will be having an Easter celebration with Palestinian Christians in Jerusalem with our Sabeel partners. And that is a tradition we started last year and was just a very powerful time of gathering together for worship. So those that connect with the Christian faith all are invited, but it is particularly a Christian worship. So I want to thank you for that. As many of you have already figured out, the chat is open where you can share your name or greetings for the speakers. We ask that you not use it too much during the presentations. Also, if you have questions for the speakers that come up as they're talking or afterwards, please use the Q&A function for that. It's the button at the bottom middle of your screen. That way we can separate out and very quickly get to the questions that you really want to hear answers to from the speakers. Again, thank you for joining us and hope you have a great webinar. I'm going to be off camera for the rest of the time because I will be working the back end tech. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. We're starting off with Omar Barghouti. Omar was born in Qatar to a Palestinian family from the Barghouti clan, and at a young age moved to Egypt, where he grew up. In 1982, he moved to the United States, where he lived for 11 years and earned a master's degree in electrical engineering from Columbia University. Since 1993, Omar has been living in Israel, holds Israeli permanent residency status, and lives in Akkad. Omar is a founding committee member of the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel and a co-founder of the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement. He received the Gandhi Peace Award in 2017. Omar, it's a great honor to have you with us, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation, and I'm glad to be with you this morning, your time. I'll speak about BDS, its motives, principles, challenges, and prospects. So let me start. Israel's full enlistment of Washington, whether in the Trump era or the current Biden administration, in its war on the BDS movement for Palestinian rights, is perhaps the strongest indicator yet of the movement's impact on Israel's regime of military occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid, and Israel's failure to crush our peaceful movement. To cite just one recent example, the Trump administration in September 2020 notified Kenya that it could forget about a free trade agreement with the US unless Nairobi discouraged politically motivated actions to boycott, divest from, and sanction Israel, and eliminated state-sponsored, unsanctioned foreign boycotts of Israel, not the US. But how did BDS, a non-violent movement, become such a strategic challenge to Israel, a country with immense military power, including a nuclear arsenal, economic strength sustained by billions of dollars in your tax money and that of Germany and others, and decades-long impunity for its egregious violations of international law? Representing the overwhelming majority of Palestinians in historic Palestine, as well as in the diaspora, the broadest Palestinian coalition in history launched the BDS movement in 2005 as a key element of Palestinian popular resistance and the most effective form of international solidarity with our quest for freedom, justice, and equality. What does BDS call for? Well, first, an end to the 1967 occupation, Gaza, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, dismantling Israel's institutionalized and legalized system of racial domination and segregation, which meets the United Nations definition of apartheid, and upholding the internationally recognized right of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and lands from which they were uprooted and dispossessed during the 1947-1948 Nakba. Israel's most important human rights organization, B'Tselem, has recently joined many Palestinian and international organizations and analysts in understanding Israel's regime against all Palestinians as, quote, a regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, an apartheid regime. The three BDS demands that I mentioned address the basic rights of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, who make up some 38% of the Palestinian people, Palestinian citizens of Israel, who make up around 12%, and Palestinians in the diaspora, who make up 50% of our people. About 2/3 of Palestinians are refugees, internally displaced persons, or living in exile, not allowed to go home. Anchored in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the BDS movement has consistently opposed all forms of racism and discrimination, including anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous discrimination, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism. One's identity, the movement upholds, should never diminish or restrict one's entitlement to rights. BDS targets complicity, not identity, and it views globalized oppression as requiring globalized resistance and solidarity. BDS is deeply rooted in decades of Palestinian popular nonviolent resistance to settler colonialism and is inspired by the South African anti-apartheid movement, the US civil rights movement, and to an extent, the Indian and Irish anti-colonial struggles. Over the last decade, Israel has become a role model for far-right, xenophobic, and authoritarian leaders across the world, and not just Trump, across the world, causing its global popularity to further decline. In contrast, the BDS movement is increasingly being recognized as a significant partner in a growing international progressive wave, fighting for global intersectional justice against the forces of fascism, xenophobia, white supremacy, and savage neoliberalism. Oppressed communities worldwide increasingly view international complicity in maintaining Israel's regime of oppression against the Palestinians as undermining the very legitimacy of the law-based international order, which in turn undermines their own struggles for justice. They're increasingly recognizing Israel's regime as including apartheid, a crime against humanity, and crucially, they're endorsing Palestinian calls for targeted and lawful sanctions to bring an end to Israel's decades-old violations of Palestinian rights under international law. For example, in a Global South response last year to the United Palestinian Appeal for Lawful Targeted Sanctions to stop Israel's apartheid regime and planned de jure or official annexation on top of de facto annexation in the occupied territory, some 10 former presidents of Latin American countries, as well as South Africa, hundreds of parliamentarians, elected officials, academics, artists, civil society leaders from Asia, Africa, Latin America have endorsed sanctions against Israel. The Senate of Chile voted overwhelmingly for sweeping sanctions if Israel went ahead with its formal plans, as did the parliaments of Belgium and the Netherlands. Even in the US, 12 Senate Democrats introduced at that time legislation that would prohibit Israel from using US military aid to annex portions of the West Bank. Such measures by governments and political figures partially explain why Israel's extremist government and its allies have intensified their war on BDS, which Israel has designated as a strategic threat since 2013. The impact of BDS campaigning at the municipal and political levels worldwide has figured prominently in an authoritative Israeli anti-BDS report that bemoaned the movement's increased sophistication and admitted that Israel has, quote, largely failed to disrupt the BDS momentum, despite its massive investment of human and material resources targeting BDS. The conclusion of this 2020 study in Israel echoes a 2017 report by two pro-Israel lobby groups, the US-based Anti-Defamation League, ADL, and Re'ut, an Israeli think tank. They outlined Israel's failure to stem the BDS movement's impressive growth and significant successes. Still, the Palestinian-led global BDS movement faces an uphill battle against an Israeli regime that is more fanatical and violent than ever. Israel is escalating its medieval, brutal siege of 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, its incessant destruction of Palestinian homes and olive groves, its gradual ethnic cleansing of indigenous Palestinian communities in Jerusalem, the Jordan Valley, and the Naqab or Negev, its relentless theft of Palestinian land, and its wanton murder and imprisonment of scores of Palestinian men, women, and children. Israel is enjoying a disturbing level of impunity thanks to blind support from its anti-Palestinian and far-right allies in the US, in Europe, India, Latin America, and increasingly in some autocratic Arab countries as well. With all this, Israel projects an unprecedentedly powerful and invincible image, partly to colonize our minds with despair. The South African Black consciousness leader Steve Biko said, quote, "The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed." End of quote. Indeed, as early as 1923, Zionist leader Ze'ev Jabotinsky wrote with lucid honesty, quote, "Every native population in the world resists colonists as long as it has the slightest hope of being able to rid itself of the danger of being colonized." He goes on, "Zionist colonization must either stop or else proceed regardless of the native population, which means that it can proceed and develop only under the protection of a power that is independent of the native population, behind an iron wall which the native population cannot breach." End of quote. Aside from its more recent concrete wall, Israel has incessantly been constructing its iron wall in Palestinian minds by trying to reduce us to lesser humans, or what I call relative humans, humans only in the relative sense, isolating us from our environment and the world, and trying to sear into our consciousness through sustained hegemonic violence the imperative of submission to its indomitable power as fate. The most important goal in colonizing the minds of the oppressed is to insidiously imprint in them the lethal futility of resisting ongoing oppression. Consequently, the struggle for Palestinian liberation has always been conditioned upon decolonizing Palestinian minds from deeply seated powerlessness and hopelessness, and embarking on a praxis, a radical process of hopeful, globalized resistance, transformation, and emancipation. After all, hope that emanates from effective popular resistance, organically coupled with principled international solidarity, is resilient and contagious. Despite decades of ruthless Israeli ethnic cleansing and settler colonial brutality, enabled mostly by your tax money, the Palestinian people have not given up. We continue to resist oppression and to assert our quest for emancipation and self-determination, as well as equal rights for all. Effective BDS campaigns have compelled conglomerates like Veolia, Orange, CRH, and others to end their involvement in Israeli operations that violate Palestinian rights. Veolia lost more than $20 billion worth of contracts over a 7-year BDS campaign. The world's largest security firm, G4S, suffered what the Financial Times described as reputational damage due to BDS campaigning. And many companies were subjected to very real pressures by grassroots campaigning. Sovereign funds in Norway, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and recently New Zealand have divested from Israeli or international companies and banks that are involved in Israel's violations of human rights. Mainstream churches in South Africa have endorsed BDS, while major churches in the United States, like the Presbyterian Church, United Methodist Church, United Church of Christ, among others, have divested from US companies or Israeli banks for their involvement in Israel's violations. The city of Dublin in 2018 in Ireland became the first European capital to adopt BDS, while tens of other cities and hundreds of cultural institutions and public spaces across Europe have declared themselves Israeli apartheid-free zones. BDS has broadened its base of support by winning the endorsement of major international trade union federations in South Africa, Latin America, India, Europe, Canada, and the US. On tens of campuses across the US, Canada, the UK, and elsewhere, broad, progressive, intersectional coalitions led by Students for Justice in Palestine and similar solidarity groups have succeeded in passing resolutions supporting BDS measures with overwhelming majorities. Intersectionality, a concept that was developed by Black feminists in the US, is fast becoming an indispensable component of effective justice struggles by oppressed communities worldwide. Based on its inclusive and progressive principles, BDS has established and nourished bonds of mutual solidarity with movements defending the rights of refugees, immigrants, Blacks, women, workers, indigenous nations, LGBTQI communities, ethnic and religious minorities, and so on. A growing number of anti-colonial Jewish Israeli BDS supporters play a significant role in exposing Israel's regime of oppression and advocating for its boycott. The Palestinian BDS National Committee, BNC, the largest coalition among Palestinians, the leader of the BDS movement, was among the first movements to unwaveringly stand in solidarity with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in its struggle against the Dakota Access Pipeline project. And in May 2020, the BNC issued a statement in solidarity with the Black-led uprisings for justice following the murder of George Floyd in police custody. It endorsed BLM's fight against white supremacy and its demands for reparations and for ending racial and economic injustice. In response to the impressive growth of support for Palestinian rights and BDS in recent years, Israel has since 2014 waged a global war on the movement, including extensive propaganda, legal warfare, and espionage. In 2016, the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, they have a full anti-BDS ministry in the Israeli government, established a tarnishing unit, that's the official name, a tarnishing unit, to smear Palestinian, Israeli, and international human rights defenders in the BDS movement. An Israeli minister has publicly threatened BDS activists, mentioning my name incidentally. He threatened us with targeted civil assassination. That's his term, targeted civil assassination, drawing condemnation from Amnesty International and other human rights organizations. Israel and its lobby groups, including fundamentalist Christian Zionist groups, have succeeded in passing anti-BDS legislation and statements in some 32 US state legislatures, as well as in Congress, drawing condemnation from the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, which condemned such legislation as unconstitutional and reminiscent of, quote, McCarthy-era tactics. Several federal courts have already frozen or overturned anti-BDS legislation in Kansas, Texas, Arizona, and Arkansas, citing their incompatibility with the First Amendment of the US Constitution. While Israel celebrates its enormous influence in the United States, it is missing the growing undercurrent of resentment and apprehension that these McCarthyite tactics are creating. A University of Maryland poll published in 2020, for instance, revealed that 72% of all Americans, 80% of Democrats, were opposed to anti-BDS legislation because they infringe on freedom of speech. An earlier poll in 2018 showed that 40% of Americans, 56% of Democrats, support imposing sanctions or more serious measures on Israel to stop its illegal settlements. Reflecting this shift, a recent letter in Congress signed by progressives warns that Israel's formal annexation of more occupied Palestinian territory would, quote, lay the groundwork for Israel becoming an apartheid state, end of quote. The letter concluded with a stark threat to condition the $3.8 billion in annual US military funding to Israel on its respect for Palestinian rights. Progressive Jewish groups, led in the US by Jewish Voice for Peace, have played a critical role in this overall shift in US public opinion, including a dramatic flux in liberal Jewish Americans' views of Israel, particularly among millennials. According to an extensive survey by the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, a right-wing pro-Israel lobby, up to 25% of liberal Jewish Americans are intensely critical of Israel and Zionism itself, including attitudes that Zionism may be a colonial and or racist apartheid movement as practiced in Israel today. Another survey conducted by the more liberal Israel lobby, J Street, published also in 2020, shows that 22% of Jewish Americans under the age of 40 support a full boycott of Israel, 22%. In a recent major blow to Israel's lawfare or legal warfare efforts in Europe, the European Court of Human Rights ruled unanimously last year that the highest French court's 2015 criminal conviction of BDS activists advocating nonviolent boycotts of Israeli goods violated Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. BDS is a matter of freedom of expression, the court ruled. So what did Israel do in response? The new anti-Semitism, quote unquote, a weaponized definition of anti-Semitism. In light of the lawfare strategy's dismal failure to criminalize or quash BDS, Israel and its lobby groups have aggressively promoted a revisionist definition of anti-Semitism that aims to shield Israel from being held accountable to universal standards of human rights and international law, as 40 Jewish organizations have said. But claiming that boycotting Israel is intrinsically anti-Semitic is really problematic. It's not just baseless propaganda. It absurdly equates Israel with all Jews. This is as bigoted as claiming that boycotting a self-defined Islamic state like Saudi Arabia, say, over its legalized discrimination against women or its war crimes in Yemen is tantamount to being Islamophobic. Nonsense. Since there is nothing Jewish about Israel's regime of occupation, siege, ethnic cleansing, and apartheid, there's nothing inherently anti-Jewish then about a nonviolent, morally consistent, anti-racist human rights movement working to end this oppression. Israel's own embrace of patent anti-Semites has irked even some of its staunch supporters. In 2019, for instance, when the Israeli government led by Netanyahu hosted the prime ministers of Hungary and other East European countries, Orban and others, all of whom have made public anti-Semitic and xenophobic statements, some tried to defend this invitation. A Likud member in the Knesset at the time, Anat Berko, said, quote, "They might be anti-Semites, but they're on our side," end of quote. Just imagine. The BDS movement upholds that fundamentally, solidarity with the oppressed entails working to cut the links of complicity with the oppressor. In other words, to do no harm. In the US context, this means ending the unparalleled US complicity in Israel's regime of oppression, cutting US military funding to Israel. This means ending complicity of city councils, churches, universities that are invested in companies doing Israel's work in oppressing Palestinians. This means adopting ethical procurement and investment guidelines that ban such companies implicated in human rights violations in Palestine and elsewhere around the world. But why should an average person in the West, in the US today, stand in solidarity with Palestinians despite having so much to worry about in their own country? Rising unemployment, poverty, systemic racism, healthcare issues, education, infrastructure disasters, especially given the COVID-19 crisis. Well, as Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa famously said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. For a citizen of a more or less democratic society like yours, which is deeply complicit in Israeli war crimes, as well as in Saudi, Emirati massacres in Yemen, in death squads in Latin America, war crimes in Afghanistan, and so on, neutrality means accepting this complicity, siding with the oppressor. To end, oppressors are more united than ever, and oppressions have never been more intersectional. It is high time to explore the mutuality of contemporary globalized resistances. Divided, we fail. United, we prevail, or at least maximize our chances of success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omar. Wonderful. We have a couple of questions to follow up. First, I just wanted to ask you, where do things stand now in terms of travel restrictions? We know the pandemic has certainly restricted travel, but we know that Israel has restricted your travel in the past. When things open up again and travel is more possible, what is your status vis-a-vis this oppression of your travel rights by Israel?
Yes, thanks, Mark. For the last 7 years, I've faced on and off de facto travel bans. When my mother had to undergo cancer surgery in Jordan, for example, I was denied the right to travel to be along her bedside. I was banned several times, and then I was allowed a couple of months, 6 months, 3 months, and then banned again, on and off for 7 years, as punishment for my human rights activism. But Israel did not stop there. It has outsourced its repression, its McCarthyism against us as human rights defenders to the US government. They tried to the British government and others. For example, in 2017, as some of you may know, I was banned by the Trump administration from entering the US. They revoked my visa without any apparent reason. Well, I know the reason. I was about to speak in a synagogue for the first time ever. I did speak online. I was about to attend my daughter's wedding in Texas. I wasn't allowed and I couldn't do that online, but I got a message across to her through my brother. I was supposed to speak at Harvard, and I did speak with Professor Cornel West at NYU with Peter Beinart, and so on and so forth. I had so many events to do, and I did all of them. Sleepless in Ramallah I was in that week, doing lectures at 2 a.m. and so on. So they do try to do all kinds of things to intimidate us, to bully us. But it's difficult. It takes its toll on me, on my family, on everyone around me. But it doesn't deter me. I'm determined to continue this struggle because I cannot live in injustice. I cannot accept a life without dignity.
Thank you. I was very moved by your description of the underlying impulse of the whole BDS movement as decolonizing Palestinian minds. And I really appreciated that very clear statement about the inherent desire for emancipation and not giving into the colonial mind, the colonialized mind. I think those of us in this country who struggle to see how we can bring about change sometimes accept the mindset of the oppressor ourselves. So that was very helpful. I did see a couple of questions. One, someone said you mentioned the Anti-Defamation League. What does, if anything, ADL have to say about the actions of the Israel's government toward the Palestinians? I'm not aware that ADL has commented on that, but do you have anything about that?
Yes, the ADL is a very problematic, it's a very racist, anti-Palestinian right-wing organization, but it's not just anti-Palestinian, it's anti-Black. It has played a role spying with the FBI against anti-apartheid activists during the anti-apartheid struggle, South African anti-apartheid struggle in the US. So the ADL has this history, this very long record of being on the side of the oppressor, on the side of repression of civil rights and human rights, contrary to its image as defending civil rights for everyone. It's a very right-wing racist organization. I urge everyone to go online and see the campaign led by Jewish partners against the ADL. Jewish Voice for Peace and other Jewish groups have launched a campaign supported by many, many groups, Latino, Black groups, indigenous groups, and others, and of course, Palestine Solidarity groups, exposing the ADL for what it is.
Good, thank you. Here's another question for you, Omar, from Wally Yazbak. It says, Omar, what is your perspective in the inclusion of a terror group of Kach and the Kahanists as members of Knesset and allies of the Likud and ultra-Orthodox extremist parties? This party is listed as a terror group in the United States as far as he remembers. And this is all part of the extreme rightward shift going on in Israeli politics. It's been going on for many years, especially hardening under Netanyahu. What is your perspective on that?
Okay, well, it's not the first time and it's not the worst thing that happened. 80 seats in the Knesset belong to the far right, from the Likud to the right. The Likud is far right. Let's be very clear here. By any international standards, Likud is a far right party. It's against equal rights for Palestinians in Israel. Forget the Palestinian non-citizens in the occupied territory, let alone Palestinian refugees. We're talking about Palestinian citizens in Israel. The Likud doesn't believe that they should get equal rights simply because they're not Jewish. That type of racism, that type of Jim Crow racism does not belong to the right. That's the far right. So everything from Likud onward is 80 out of 109 Jewish Knesset members, and 110 Jewish Knesset members, 80 of them are the far right. 80. So it's a horrible shift to the far right that has taken over Israel over the last 10 years or so. So now with a fascist party like the Kahanists joining the Knesset, the mask has been dropped entirely. So this whole time, Israel is trying to wear its worn out mask with difficulty. Now the mask is gone, simply. The fascists, the neo-Nazis are in the Knesset, and they're openly calling for killing Palestinians, for expelling Palestinians, ethnic cleansing, and so on. But so is Likud. So is so much of the Zionist spectrum in the Israeli Knesset, not to mention groups that are not in the Knesset. So fascism has become much more in vogue in Israel today. But unfortunately, this impunity, Israel is the only country that can get away with this while still be considered a quote democracy and still receiving billions and billions of US tax money. So this becomes the most urgent form of solidarity, doing whatever it takes to change policy from the city level to the state level to the federal level to cut US military funding to Israel. It's the most urgent thing to do.
All right. Another question here about, do you have any idea of the level of support for BDS within Israel?
It's very hard to tell. We don't have any statistics, but we know that it's increasing. It's a small number, to be honest. It's not a large number of Jewish Israelis who support BDS, but we're very proud of their support, of their courageous position, despite the repression. 20, 30 years ago, Israel has always been an apartheid state, but at least it used to be democratic for Jewish Israelis. They really enjoyed a lot of rights, democratic rights, freedom of the press, freedom of expression, forget Palestinians. We were always the underdog, always the third-class citizens. But even for Jewish Israeli dissidents today, it's becoming scary. Our partners in Israel face enormous repression, threats, intimidation, and all kinds of smears that they are traitors, and you know what to do with traitors. You see the comments in newspaper articles about the left, the real left in Israel, the anti-Zionist left, all kinds of threats, and they should be thrown into the sea 6 feet under the, very, very scary stuff. But that has become normalized with this militancy, with this militarized society in Israel. Yes, it's also affecting dissidents. So I think the number is still very small, but we're very proud that it exists and it's growing.
Okay, let's take maybe two more. One is the growing sense that that the two-state solution is moribund, is a dead corpse, really, not a viable option, hasn't been for years, been whatever hope there may have been in it, certainly dismantled by Israel's aggressive expansion and confiscation of Palestinian land. But also the growing interest in the one-state solution. Of course, it's not a new idea. It originated among Palestinian scholars a long time ago and activists, but it has gained more recent currency. And I wonder what you personally think about the one-state solution, and then to the extent that there is a BDS position or perspective on the one-state solution, that would be helpful as well.
Sure. The BDS movement is totally agnostic on this. We don't take a position on one state versus two states. What we say is that to achieve any just solution, any just and peaceful solution to this colonial conflict, we need to end the occupation, end apartheid, and respect the right of return for Palestinian refugees. Those three main ingredients are fundamental in any reasonable solution. So that's what we stick to. We adhere to our human rights agenda. It's partly because we are a human rights movement. We're not the political leadership of the Palestinian people. Yes, BDS is led by the absolute broadest, largest coalition in Palestinian society, but guess how we maintain the consensus? By sticking to our human rights mandate. If we dare to step beyond the mandate, we would run into so many problems internally, let alone externally. So even to maintain our coalition, we don't get into one state, two states. Every one of us has his or her own opinion. I've personally, in my personal capacity since 1983, have advocated for a secular democratic state with equal rights for everyone. That's my personal position, but I never bring this to the BDS table because we simply take no position on this. The current task for solidarity groups, at least, is not to decide for Palestinians what solution works best. It's up to Palestinians to determine our future. The task is to end complicity. at the church level, university level, institution level, city council level, ending complicity. That is the most important task, to do no harm.
One last question. The Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, which come out recently, included a number of Holocaust scholars and prominent Jewish intellectuals as an alternative to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. I know BDS has offered a really thoughtful critique of that. Could you briefly comment on the IHRA definition of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, a definition of anti-Semitism, the new Jerusalem Declaration, and the new BDS critique of it?
Sure. In a nutshell, the so-called IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is not related to the real struggle to end anti-Jewish racism, as tens of progressive Jewish groups, as hundreds of the most prominent scholars of the Holocaust and of anti-Semitism have already written, that the IHRA is designed to protect Israel and its regime of oppression from censure, from accountability to universal standards of international law. That's what it does, basically. It silences Palestinians and advocates of Palestinian rights. It tries to criminalize our speech in defense of our own rights and our narration of our own history. That's what the IHRA does. It's a McCarthyite tool galore. There's nothing as repressive as this is. And they're trying to pass it, to codify it into law and policy in the US and across Europe. So this new declaration on anti-Semitism, signed by many prominent academics, Jewish international and Jewish Israeli academics, is definitely a far better definition, of course. And it goes to refute the main premises in the IHRA. It says, calling for BDS per se is not anti-Semitic. Calling for a one-state solution is not anti-Semitic. Advocating against apartheid Israel, saying Israel is a settler colony, and so on and so forth, are not anti-Semitic per se. You have to prove anti-Semitic intent if you want to say anything about that. So in that sense, it is far better. It's a much more useful instrument to defend our space to freedom of expression, which has been eroded, which has been under attack by the IHRA, bullying and McCarthyism. So this is, in a way, an important step against that, but it's inherently flawed. Any definition on anti-Semitism that focuses on Israel, the Palestinians, and Zionism cannot but take into account Palestinian perspectives. This declaration doesn't. They simply ignored representative Palestinian views on this. But what does Palestine have to do with anti-Semitism to start with? What does Jerusalem have to do with anti-Semitism? Why don't you stick to the real source of anti-Semitism? The absolute majority of anti-Semitic hatred and violence in this world come from the right and the far right, from white supremacists. The JDA does not mention white supremacy once, only in the Q&A after our critique. They've included mention of, they do not mention white supremacy whatsoever. At the same time that Israel's best friends in Germany, for example, the fascist far right, were advocating for criminalizing BDS in the Bundestag, in the German parliament, a police report in Germany came out in early this year saying that in 2020, there was a sharp rise in anti-Semitic attacks, 96% of which, those attributable to a clear motive, 96% were perpetrated by the right and the far right. 96%. Israel's best friends in parliament are the ones responsible for the 96% attacks against Jews in Germany. And the Bundestag is busy criminalizing BDS, trying to silence BDS. So that's the formula. As Anat Berko, the member of the Likud in the Knesset, said, they're anti-Semites, but they're on our side. If that's the new formula, then it's okay to be anti-Jewish as long as you're pro-Israel, as long as you accept Israeli apartheid, it's okay to be anti-Jewish. That's, in a nutshell, what the IHRA stands for. In that sense, the JDA, the new declaration on anti-Semitism, is a step that can help fight back, roll back IHRA repression and McCarthyism.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, let me just briefly introduce Jeff, and Jeff will introduce Nushin, who will give us a virtual tour of the BDS Toolkit website. Jeff Dio has received his BA from Kansas State University in philosophy, his Master of Divinity degree from Princeton Theological Seminary, where he and I met and are proud alums together, and his Doctor of Ministry degree from McCormick Theological Seminary. Jeff served churches in Kansas, Minnesota, Ohio, and Florida, and presently serves as pastor of the Covenant Presbyterian Church in Fort Myers, Florida. Jeff served as the first advocacy chairperson for the PCUSA Israel-Palestine Mission Network for 8 years. Did amazing work through that organization as the denomination was wrestling with and finally did approve divestment. And then as its moderator for 4 years, also great service there. Following this, Jeff has served with the Global Kairos organization of the World Council of Churches and helped lead a team in the development of the BDS Toolkit. Jeff was recently elected to serve on the PCUSA Advisory Committee for Social Witness Policy. Jeff, it's good to see you again, and welcome to our webinar.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be part of this webinar, and it's an honor to be on the same panel with Omar. And I just want to share that I had the opportunity to meet Omar over a decade ago in Beit Sahur. I was on a trip to plant olive trees, and I was also involved in working on strategy as the advocacy chair for the Israel-Palestine Mission Network of the PCUSA. And I had all kinds of thoughts about how I would go about doing this as the advocacy person, and I needed advice. So I spoke to Omar. He spoke to our group. So I cornered him after the thing, and he didn't know who I was, but I introduced myself. And I asked him, I was throwing strategies out at him, and he looked at me and said, do whatever works. So basically what we did was, one of the strategies that we had was that I was committed to achieving in the PCUSA BDS one letter at a time. And our group kept working at it and trying to get actions across to the national church to pass to approve boycott, divestment, and a call for sanctions. And eventually that happened. So we got BDS one letter at a time. And I thank Omar for his insight and his input. It wasn't just that meeting in Beit Sahur, but I was in contact with him later as well. So we're going to talk about how the BDS toolkit came together. As I was asked to do a survey on behalf of the Global Kairos Global for Justice organization of the World Council of Churches. And we did a survey across the world. We received 38 responses from 16 different countries, representing the work of 25 BDS Kairos related or Palestinian justice organizations. And they gave us great input in this survey about their individual experience. We also worked hard to get Palestinian voices in on this from all over. And they gave us great input and about what their challenges were. And we immediately knew that something needed to be done across globally. And so then the Global Kairos organization asked us to pull together a team, the team to create something, a resource that would serve the various organizations and groups across the world in their BDS work. And there was a lot of latitude in terms of where groups were working and what they understood. So we needed to fill in some gaps. And so the team came together, worked very hard, and it was a great team to create the BDS Toolkit website. One of the people that I've worked with in the Israel-Palestine Mission Network for many years, in fact, I met her in 2006 in Palestine on a PCUSA trip. And from that point on, we began work in the Israel-Palestine Mission Network. And we're on the steering committee together for many years. And Nusheen Framke has great talent technically, she put the BDS Toolkit website together. And I knew when I was asked to lead this job that I was going to ask Nusheen to be part of it because I knew the good job that she does. And she's going to give us the tour of the Toolkit website right now. Nusheen, welcome aboard. It's great to have you on the team, always has been.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and thank you so much to Mark and of course to Omar for this amazing presentation today. I'm going to have to watch it a few times, I think, to get it all absorbed. So I am going to, let me hit share screen and get the BDS Toolkit website up. Okay. So as Jeff said, this BDS Toolkit was a team effort, and originally it was going to be a free downloadable PDF file. But then we decided we needed it to be more changeable over time and updatable, so to speak. And we kind of widened our lens. So let me quickly go through the various pages, not all of them, of course. It's a big website. It has more than 50 pages, so clearly I'm not going to show everything. But this is the homepage we're looking at. Just want to show you there is a gallery of photos with all the photos that are used in the website right on the homepage, and you can use these photos if you credit them. And then at the very bottom of the homepage, there's a video tour of the website, which we don't need to look at today, but there's a downloadable PDF file with all the text that's in the website. So if you want the text in one place, it's there on the bottom of the homepage. This website was developed for a faith-based audience. And the first menu item goes to answering some of the theological questions. The very first drop down under that why BDS is our theology page. There is what we have called the 10 commandments of BDS solidarity. And we list 10 commandments, each with its own scripture. And I'm going to jump to that particular page. Each of these commandments of solidarity starts with a scripture reference and then talks about why that is important. So let me just look at one of them for you. Thou shalt reject normalization of Israel's narrative and monopoly. And the scripture comes from 2 Chronicles and so on. Under YBDS also is a listing of organizations, Christian organizations who are in solidarity, and we've listed them geographically. So you see there's North America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Pacific, and so on. Also under YBDS is a link to Cry for Hope, which is a new statement that's gone up. We just have linked to their website. So it opens up in a new page, who we are, etc. And that's also a global Kairos effort along with Kairos Palestine effort. So that's the first drop down menu item. The second one is BDS 123, which is the basics, the nuts and bolts. Under that we have what is BDS? It's kind of a BDS 101, gives an overview, the big picture, and then the next drop down, and I'll go to it from here, is FAQs, frequently asked questions. And again, depending on who you are around the world, this, as Jeff said, this is done for a global audience, and different parts of the world are in different places on doing BDS. So we don't assume anybody knows anything. So we've got a lot of kind of BDS 101 items here. And there's the BDS how-to, the nuts and bolts, as we called it, how to do this and how it's been done by some. So there's a case study, and the case study happens to be the Presbyterian Church USA, because Jeff and I worked on this together, and we used the Presbyterian Church's example. And we have tips for success. 3 really good tips here. And then we have the stories section. This is the stories that came back from the survey that Jeff mentioned. They're listed in a drop-down alphabetically, but I'm going to go to the main page to show you what it looks like. And this, this survey that we did, that all these responses came in, kind of told us how people are in different places in doing this work. But it really showed how, we don't need to be alone doing this, and we can be doing this together with groups around the world and around our own regions. So this is hopefully a way of connecting people. So this is the home page of the stories, or the main page, I should say, of the stories. And then there's news below that from other parts of the world. So we've got some news down below. But for example, let me just show you, for example, the South Africa page. There's, I think, 2 or 3 stories from South Africa. So when we highlight, a quote on the side here, a pull quote, so to speak, 3 stories from South Africa that, can be used as inspiration, or, oh, well, we're kind of doing the same thing, or we're stuck in the same place, that kind of thing. And then we have a section labeled challenges. And the main page for challenges breaks down, we've identified 4 main challenges. Of course, there are more, but these are the 4 main challenges that we've identified. Financing that goes into anti-BDS work, the charge of anti-Semitism that's already been mentioned this morning, Zionism itself, and then Christian Zionism. And then we have a conclusion for all of those. And each of those sections on their own page have a short rebuttal, which we've repeated right here in this main area. So we've got a short rebuttal for each of those charges that can be used. Just to show you one of the pages, let's go to the charges of anti-Semitism. This is what that looks like. And there are links, and this is one other reason we decided to go with a website rather than a PDF file. Even though you can have links in a digital PDF file, it's much more useful to have live links like this, that you can jump right to those places that are mentioned. And then the rebuttal is at the bottom of the page. So then there is a extensive legal section. Now, of course, some of this stuff, people will only want to come here to look at the challenges or to look at the BDS 1, 2, 3. This is just kind of a comprehensive place to come and find information. At the risk of supplying too much information, we've kind of tried to be comprehensive. So this is the main page for the legal part of the toolkit. And it breaks down under justice for all refugees, freedom from occupation and apartheid, equality for all people living under Israeli control. And then we have, as you can see, we have 6 pages that are separate pages under this legal area. And then we've got 7 steps to keep at it. So for example, number 2, do not allow legal intimidation or chilling tactics to stop your group's research, education, advocacy, or partnership on BDS. Be strategic and careful, but direct and firm when intimidation occurs. So I won't go into every little thing on here, but let me jump to, so of these 6 legal sections, legal pages under the legal section, let me just show you. So for example, lawfare. Lawfare, as Omar mentioned, is using the law as a weapon of war. And under the lawfare section, we've got things that apply and how there's the IRHA definition that was talked about. So it's very comprehensive, the legal section. And hopefully, you know, the things that people need to find out about will be there. And then we've got a vocabulary section, which is a very, it's a glossary like the end of a book, but very specifically curated words that for some people in the movement, you know, they've been using these words a long time. But for some who are new to this, this is a way of showing them these particular words like complicity, divestment, exceptionalism, ethnic cleansing, impunity. So, you know, there's a list of words in this concept, Zionism is settler colonialism, are listed under this vocabulary page. And there's only 2 more sections. The resources I won't show you, that is just a list of more resources, but the videos page is important because we've, again, carefully curated specific videos. I think there are 12 videos. Yes, 12 videos. Quite short. Most of them are quite short, that cover different strategies, tactics, concepts. So for example, we have here one example of grassroots success, and it's city council in France. And it shows the conversation that was had at the city council. And it can be used by other city councils to do the same, or groups that are advocating to make change at city council level. There's one here, the money behind the anti-BDS groups within US churches. And this shows how the Israel Action Network funded and organized and choreographed the anti-BDS efforts within the Presbyterian Church USA, the Methodist Church, and so on. And they talk about funding the efforts of within those churches by church members, but the funding came from Israel Action Network, which is funds from Israel. And so, and there's more different short little videos that can be used by you know, new groups, church-based groups, and so on. So I'm going to jump back to the homepage, and that's the little tour of the toolkit, the toolkit that was launched last November on, yeah. Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Nusheen. What a great resource. I was aware of it, but not in the depth that you showed us. And it strikes me it would be a wonderful use, wonderful thing for study groups, faith-based groups, activist groups to use together to reinforce each other and to learn more, fill in gaps where the knowledge is not as strong. Looks like an excellent resource. Let me just turn it back over to you, Jeff, if any, and to Nusheen, if y'all have any more things you'd like to add as part of your presentation.
I'm very thankful to the people who worked on the team. There's a listing of, there's an acknowledgements on the homepage of those who worked. not only part of the Global Kairos team, but others who contributed. And, and there have been some very important people on the Global Kairos team that have made a big difference. Ron John Solomon, Rifat Kassis, Nadal Abuzulov are all have been significant players in giving us leadership in terms of pulling this together and making it happen. I'm thankful for all the talents and the gifts that were brought to make this website as vital as it is. So thank you, and Nushin did a great job building it. So I'm appreciative of that. What I would say is that I think the website does adequately reflect some important things, and Nushin mentioned some of it on the tour, but I just want to mention the important items that came out of the survey that we wanted to address, because these are important issues. Issues pertaining to concerns over anti-Semitism, the importance of recognizing and advancing BDS as a nonviolent movement, issues pertaining to pressure coming from Zionism and Christian Zionism, drawing parallels between or differentiating the histories of the South African and Palestinian BDS movements, identifying and integrating local indigenous struggles and movements with the Palestinian struggle and BDS, BDS tactics and splitting them up or not, and the need to use BDS strategies as a whole or separate tactics. That was important because part of what we got in the survey was people were wondering how to go about doing this in their setting. And it was like me starting out and asking Omar for advice. What do I do? And it's sort of like saying, do what works. Let's explore your situation, explore your setting, your context, and figure out how it's going to work best. Another item that's reflected on is the importance of ecumenical and interfaith initiatives, which I know the Presbyterian Church USA has been very involved in through the Israel-Palestine Mission Network. We've had a lot of ecumenical and interfaith activities doing this work. Creating strategies for dealing with governments that support Israel in spite of violations of international law. Recognizing the lack of understanding of the Palestinian context and history, and creating good educational resources and experiences to that end. Emphasizing the Christian call to the oppressed, the poor, the displaced, and the dispossessed of the world. Drawing parallels between many different colonial enterprises in global history and today. And getting to know and working with Jewish and Israeli justice groups. That's been a very important asset for the work we've been doing. So those are some of the items that came out of the survey that we were encouraging groups across the world to engage. And so it's been a good journey putting this together and being in consultation with these groups and sharing our insights and our experiences with them.
Wonderful. Nushin, anything more you'd like to add before we go to question and answer? Okay. Great. There was a question, how long was this in the making? From the day you began the surveys to the final building of the website that Nushin did so well? What would the arc of the project? How many years was it in the making?
Oh gosh, it's been at least a couple years, or Nushin?
Well, the conversation about it started happening, I would say, once the conversations were happening, a couple years total. But once we started the work, a year.
Yeah, it was a solid year of work, right? But we did start the conversations earlier.
Good.
And it was a global team.
Yeah.
So, so doing the Zooms was a challenge because we had, 12-hour time differences we were dealing with.
Wonderful. Well, there've been lots of comments in the chat about what a superb resource this is, and I think probably underutilized. I'm not sure how many people are really aware of it, and all this great work that's gone in from a broad a group of folks with wide perspectives, ecumenical. So I would just, for any of you that are on the the webinar, please take the time to go through it. And I think it could really be a great resource for church groups. I think somebody really wants to help people through that. And I was just going to ask each of you if you know of specific examples where church or faith-based groups, activist groups have made use of the toolkit in their work. Any specific guidance you could give to folks that are thinking about doing that?
First of all, I'm not sure I mentioned the URL. The website is bdstoolkit.org. You might have seen it on the homepage, but just to say it. And it has, so for example, I was on a webinar similar to this one, introducing the toolkit to a group in the UK. And people have started using it in the UK that I'm aware of. I don't know, Jeff, if you have been talking to anybody in other places that are using it, but the point being that, of course, the BDS movement's own website has a wealth of information, and that we didn't need to recreate that, obviously, but we were aiming to equip faith-based groups with this, which is why theology, and I forgot to mention, we also have a full-length paper, theology paper by David Wildman of United Methodist Church, available for download, the theology for BDS, theological rationale for BDS. So yeah, it's different and new in that it's trying to equip faith-based groups. Either activist groups or a particular congregation, specific one congregation. But no, I don't have information back. I'm not the right person to give you the answer of who is using it. Unfortunately, I would have to get that from Palestine. I'm
not aware of that either. So
there is a connection to a Facebook page right on the home page of the toolkit. There's a link to a Facebook page for Global Kairos, and there's solidarity information at the Facebook page that maybe you can connect to other groups that way. That's the idea. Great.
Let me just ask Omar if you have any comments about the BDS toolkit, what you see as its main value, and any thoughts you have about how it could be used to help advance the BDS movement.
Well, I think it's a great toolkit, actually. I really appreciate the breadth of the information in it and how pinpointed a lot of it is. The amount of research that has gone into it, and it's really well thought out, well conceived, and I think it will help a lot in reaching out to the unconverted faith communities, or those who are still entrenched into this very problematic normalization interfaith type of work, where they ignore justice, which I call interfail, because they speak about everything except justice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I just wonder too, I haven't looked at the site to be sure about this, but Eugene, you would know, is there a place for groups who've used the site to comment on it, so that you could build a sense of who's using the site, what their experience of it has been, almost kind of a Yelp thing? And of course, you'd have to monitor that. But if you get really good comments from groups that have found it helpful, that's helpful for other groups that come along and see, oh, it's been used in this capacity and it was helpful. Do you know, is that part of the thinking of the website?
Well, that's basically what you're, I think, describing as a forum.
Yeah.
And we don't have a forum. We could easily add one, technically speaking, but the problem is the moderating part of it. Somebody has to be moderating it constantly.
Right.
Constancy, that is the issue. So we haven't gone there, but I think Jeff and I can take this to the others, and it's a good idea. It's just, it needs staffing.
Yeah. I wasn't trying to load on any more work, but just you've all done so much already. But I just a way of building the use of the site and the credibility of the site, the way it's being used in other settings, helps people when they're thinking about tackling it and using it in a group setting. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, we tried to have a to provide that with the stories section, but it's not an interactive version, which what we have provides other people's stories, but without the need for moderation. But you know, maybe that down the line, that's what we need to do to make it better.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you both so much for all the work that's gone into this and that very valuable tour that you led us through, Nushin. It was great. Let me just see what other questions may be in the chat. A lot of people saying they really have liked it. Here's a suggestion. Perhaps you could add a contact us section and request feedback with permission to post quotes, things like that. You know, the lots of ways of trying to make use of it. And this is our big goal in having the BDS toolkit being a featured part of this webinar. You know, BDS is such a huge and compelling project, and people are doing what they can individually and with their organizations, but you know, always with new tips about how to implement, how to be concrete, how to engage in meaningful praxis around BDS and being in solidarity. So this is great. Let me look back at the Q&A, see if there are any other comments for.
While you're looking,
yes,
I say there is a contact us section at the bottom of the homepage. And for example, this morning, there was a message from the Mennonite Church in Canada to add them to the list of churches in solidarity. So,
great.
But it, you know, it doesn't show their contact doesn't show up on the website, but we've added the Mennonite Church in Canada to the list now. So.
Yeah, here's a comment from Imad Saba, who said he's won every BDS campaign he's done by asking the question, what is the alternative? Yeah, and there was a really interesting comment recently. I think there was a Q&A between a reporter and the spokesperson for the U.S. State Department, and he kept saying, well, where are they supposed to go? Speaking of the Palestinians. In other words, he just kept getting stonewalled by the State Department. And the question from the reporter is, well, you know, essentially, what is the alternative? What if not this, then what are they supposed to do? So it kept pushing the discussion, although it wasn't ever named, back to BDS and to this kind of activism. All right. Any other comments or questions from either of you for the group? Here's one. Does the website have a list of products or companies to boycott? And has that been updated?
Well, we link to other places, other websites who are specialists at this. Like, for example, Who Profits, or there's other groups that we connect to for the latest lists. You know, like there's no way we could maintain a website that's constantly ahead of everything. So that's another reason why we decided to make it a website rather than a PDF, because we can link to other websites that are just for a particular purpose.
If I may add
yes,
to
Omar,
this,
please.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think to agree with Nushin, actually, even the BDS movement website does not have a list. The point is, if I'm a church and I want to check whom to invest or divest from, yes, then the AFSC Investigate tool is great. Who Profits is a great tool. That's the best to check what companies are involved in the occupation. But if someone wants to launch a campaign against a specific company and wants a list of companies, it's not helpful, because we cannot boycott like 1,000 companies. We've got to see the context. As Jeff said, indeed, what works in your context is what we go after. So the Presbyterians, after 10 years of discussions, ultimately took the great decision of divesting from HP, Caterpillar, Motorola Solutions. Are these the only criminal corporations? Of course not, but they had to start somewhere, and those were very important targets. So in a nutshell, there are 4 criteria that the BDS movement adopts for selecting targets, because we've got to be strategic. This is not just about feeling good. This is not a movement about, yeah, it's the effort that counts. No, it's not just the effort that counts. We want our rights. So we've got to be strategic and goal-oriented. It's not enough to do a good effort. We need the result, which is our rights. So the first criterion is level of complicity. The more complicit a company is, obviously, the easier it is to target it. 2, intersectionality. If a company is not just infringing on Palestinian rights, but other rights, Black people's rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, any other rights, then it's a better target because it connects struggles. Intersectionality is very important. 3rd, brand name, media appeal. A big company like HP or Caterpillar, or a company that's obscure but as guilty, we go after the big name because it helps us reach the media and reach the mass public. The 4th and last criterion is potential for success. So we should never forget that. Potential for success. If I'm pursuing a company that fulfills all the above 3 criteria, yet is a monopoly, is so dominant that I cannot go after it, I put it on the shelf for a better day. If I cannot succeed, whatever my objectives are, I don't pursue it, because our human resources are our biggest investment. We cannot waste them.
Great, thank you. All right. Here's a question for you, Omar. Have you had a conversation with Jim Zogby of the Arab American Institute? I'm assuming you all are in contact, but what could you say about that?
I'm sorry, about what exactly?
It doesn't say. The question does not say. Just I guess interfacing with Jim Zogby and his work with the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee and its efforts.
No, the Arab American Institute. Yeah, the Arab American Institute and Jim Zogby invited me to that 2017 tour of the United States, actually. So they were very involved when the Trump administration banned me. They were very much involved in defending my right to be there. And of course, Jim Zogby has been defending Palestinian rights for decades. He's been involved in the Democratic Party and outside the Democratic Party for decades. So, of course, they play an important role.
All right. Let's see. Check and see if there's another one here. Someone was asking about Abby. We all are wondering why Abby is unable to join us, and hope that maybe she can still get on. But while we're talking about Abby, there certainly has been a lot of interest in resisting the anti-boycott laws. You referred to that in your presentation. Here in North Carolina, the state has passed one, and we've got a growing coalition working to try to reverse HB 161. We thought initially that this was a law which forbid individuals from practicing boycott, but it's not. It's focused on companies, and so this is another thing that we've had to get educated about. Let's see. Let me also ask Omar what you would have to say about, well, I guess we could call the persistence of the oppressive mindset. I mean, those of us that have been working in our own way to try to resist white supremacy in this in the American context, now see, the state of Georgia passing these sweeping voter discrimination laws, and the picture of the governor signing had a slave plantation in the background, all white men standing over the governor while it was being signed. And it just seems there's a huge crackdown coming, or an attempt to sort of harden this oppressive mindset, and you've certainly experienced that in the Israeli context. What would you say about what have you experienced and discovered as the most important things for continuing a struggle against a deeply entrenched oppressive mindset over time?
Well, I think there's so many experiences of struggle around the world that give us hope. The Black Lives Matter movement gives us, all of us around the world, a lot of hope. Despite 400 years of oppression of African Americans, Black Americans, they continue to struggle. They continue to fill the streets with their justice, racial justice struggles. And finally, they're making an impact. They're affecting politicians. They're impacting city councilors, Congress people, and so on. So finally, they're starting to impact policy. It's not just a grassroots movement any longer. That gives us enormous hope. I think the main point is oppressors really try to colonize our minds with despair, that we have hegemonic power. It's impossible to resist us. So you might as well live with oppression, adapt to oppression. We'll give you some bones, we'll throw you some bones, and just adapt to that. You just have to live with that. And it's very easy to fall into that because you are the weaker party, and they are truly hegemonic, truly powerful. But when we say that our moral strength is even bigger than their physical strength, we're not being romantic, we're not being idealistic. We have seen how moral strength translates into strategic plans and campaigning and hard work. I mean, it's not enough to be right. Being right morally is extremely important. It's a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition. You've got to translate right into campaigning to achieve justice. Without the campaigning, being strategic, being goal-oriented, being connected with large networks, united with other struggles, it's impossible to win. But we extract hope from every success we get, and we celebrate the successes despite the overall dim picture. So in this dim picture of COVID-19, ongoing oppression, and so on, Israel's apartheid, we continue to extract hope from everything we achieve. Just a few weeks ago, the New Zealand Sovereign Fund divested from all Israeli banks because they're listed in the UN database of companies involved in the settlements. We celebrate that victory, and we push Norway to do the same, and we push the Netherlands to do the same, and so on. We push the churches to do the same, to go beyond HP, Caterpillar, and so on. So that's the main source of strength, is not just being morally right, but having hope based on real campaigning on the ground, real strategic thinking on the ground.
Yeah, so it sounds like celebrate and agitate all at the same time. Never
Yes.
stop the celebrating or the agitating. Yeah, that's very helpful.
One of the things that we in the Presbyterian Church believed in and kind of pushed for, and then we hope with this website we're going to affect other churches to do, is not just to go for a clean hands policy, but as churches, we are morally obliged to make change. We don't want to just have clean hands. It's not enough to just have clean hands. We would say this without hesitation on other issues. But with this issue, it's harder to see that, hey, it's not enough to have clean hands. You've got to change policies and bad behavior of corporations. And then by doing that, you change public opinion, which is the point. And, when public opinion changes, that's when you reach the tipping point, which is how it happened with South Africa. Public opinion changed, and then banks and governments had to go with public opinion.
I would agree with Nushin. I think one of the keys to this work in our context is simply to make noise. This was not an issue in the Presbyterian Church USA until we started making noise. And you can't be afraid of the blowback that comes from making noise. For instance, someone in the chat asked the question, have people had any success in getting letters to the editor published in newspapers and etc.? I got a story that goes with that. I have taken a number of groups from the church that I'm presently serving to Palestine for the Joint Advocacy Initiative, which is planting trees and harvesting olives for Palestinian farmers. And one of the reactions I get back from the people I take, and I mean, whenever I announce a trip, I mean, I've got people, oh yeah, I'll go, because they've been there and done that and they love it. I've had many people say to me after going on one of these trips, I didn't know what I didn't know. I mean, all you have to do is take people on a trip and let them see it with their own eyes, and views change. So anyway, we came back from a trip one time, and a number of the people who went on the trip whose eyes were opened wrote letters to the editor to our local paper in Fort Myers, Florida. And they were writing letters to the editor, but they were also getting letters responding back to them in not so nice ways. But they were making noise. And then I finally decided to write a letter to the editor myself. And I entitled the letter "Come and See, and You Will Know." And I just talked about coming and seeing, and the experience of seeing oppression firsthand will change your heart. I mean, that's what I talked about. I talked about, so at any rate, I wrote that letter, and it came out sometime in the latter part of the week. And then on Sunday morning, I checked the paper before leading my worship service, and it turns out that there was an op-ed, big half-page op-ed, written by leaders of the ADL here in Southwest Florida, hammering me. And they did research on me, by the way, and they hammered me on my simple little letter saying, "Come and see, and your heart will be changed." So you got to be prepared for that. But the thing is, when you make noise, people hear you, and it makes a difference. It changes things when you make noise, and that's important, to step out there and make noise. And it helps to be part of organizations that do that, and so forth. But be prepared for the blowback sometimes, because it comes. But you got to stand up to it.
Thank you, Jeff. I do see Murtaza Kawaja is on. Are you on?
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everyone.
Oh,
Can you all
good.
hear me?
Yes, thank you so much. Please go ahead. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Murtaza Kawaja. I'm the Legal and Policy Director at CARE Georgia. CARE is our nation's largest Muslim civil rights group. As many of you know, we are in the process, along with CARE National, of defending Abby Martin, who's a world-renowned journalist who had the opportunity to come speak at Georgia Southern and was denied that opportunity because she refused to sign a contract which said she had to abridge her First Amendment rights and give up her right to boycott, specifically the government of Israel. This was a law that was passed a few years ago, which Leader Abrams, minority leader at the time of the Georgia House, led the opposition against because it abridges against our First Amendment right to boycott. Unfortunately, the law did pass. We've seen these laws turn up all over in multiple other states, but every time we've seen this law come up and we've been able to have a plaintiff, we have been successful in our challenge against them and overruled the law. What, unfortunately, the response to this is the Israeli government has sent officials to lobby at state houses saying that instead of having a $1,000 amount for when the contract kicks in, they want to change it to $100,000. So while our client, Abby Martin, would still have remedy and would still be able to recover for the damages she faced, this case then would not overturn the law itself. So it's a blatant attempt to avoid the law itself being overturned. It absolutely is an unconstitutional bill, is a bill that abridges our First Amendment rights and abridges the rights of Georgians and puts a foreign entity first as opposed to the people of Georgia. So we saw this session at the Georgia legislature, two bills introduced. One is HB 383. 383 is the bill that changes the contract amount from 1,000 to 100,000. But because of our lobbying, our advocacy, and our community support and phone calls, we were able to introduce HB 712, which is actually a repeal of the law in its entirety, and it would remove an unconstitutional law from the books. 383 right now has been recommitted while it's in the Senate. So while it did pass the House, it is not moving in the Senate yet, and we don't expect it to move this legislative session. That being said, we've seen some really incredible shenanigans happen at the Georgia State Legislature this year, especially in regards to voter suppression. So you never know what can happen. But there are only 2 more days which they have an opportunity to pass this bill. Otherwise, it will not pass this session, and the law will stay as it is, which is the contract amount being $1,000.
All right, wonderful. So good you could join us. We were trying to speak intelligently about this situation. We know some, but not nearly as much as you've helped us with. This is great. Let's see. Are there specific things that that those of us who are supportive can do on behalf of this case, and specific things that strategies for challenging anti-boycott bills? We're doing something similar with the North Carolina law, and I'm just wondering about best practices from your point of view. Anything you could share that would be helpful to others of us that are working in this same vein?
Absolutely. So in regards to those of you in other states, we've seen these laws erupt across the country. For the most part, they are unconstitutional. The struggle has been finding a person who has standing to challenge them. So journalist Abby Martin was an incredible plaintiff for us, one with incredible standing and one who fit the criteria. Doesn't need to be a renowned journalist, though. It can be anyone who has standing. So depending on the amount in controversy, whether it's 1,000 or 2,000 or however much, it makes it a little bit easier. But identifying that plaintiff is really important, one who has standing. Because every time a plaintiff has had standing, this law has been overturned. The second thing is at the state legislature, lobbying your elected officials to overturn this law, because it does abridge our First Amendment right to boycott. There's case law that shows that, there's precedent that shows that, and there's black letter law that shows that. So these are all things that you can go to your state representatives with. We have one-pagers prepared that we can share with you, and lobby them to remove this law, repeal this law in its entirety, because it is an unconstitutional law. And the other thing is just to be mindful that there will be opposition. There will be those that say that we should have this law in the books, but not to be discouraged by that, because if this goes to court, it will be overturned because it is unconstitutional. We've seen it happen throughout the country. And then also we know state legislatures are moving in a way that are more protective of rights to boycott and rights to protest that are protected by our Constitution and our laws. So I would encourage that. We'll be happy to share any of the laws that we have introduced, whether that's our repeal law or also any of the complaints we filed. We've also found great partners in J Street and Truro, who are two pro-Israel groups, but who wrote amicus briefs on our behalf because they understand that the inherent right to boycott is inherent to American democracy. And in their brief, they cite that it's inherent to the Jewish religion as well. So that's something we think is an incredibly important perspective to share.
Great. Murtaza, could you put your contact information in the chat so that some of us can follow up with you, just so any questions we may have for further information?
Absolutely, I'll do that. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure being able to speak with all of you. Please do follow us on Care Georgia. We have, for those of you in Georgia, we've put out an action alert that will automatically send a letter to your elected officials in Georgia. You can find that on our Care Georgia page, and it will tell them that you don't want to support 383 and that you want to support the repeal of the bill in its entirety, which is HB 712. So it's an incredibly easy way for you to send a letter to both your state representative and state senator. I will put my contact in the chat. I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation and speaking with you all again in the future.
Murtaza, thank you. There was a note saying that you're joining us while you're on vacation, so we really appreciate you doing that. Thank you for being with us. Where are you?
No problem. No, I took a weekend trip to come to the North Georgia mountains. So this is my view right now. I'll just give everyone a little. I don't know if y'all can see with the lighting, but I don't have great Wi-Fi, so I'm glad I was able to join, and I definitely appreciate the invitation.
All right. Thank you so much. We look forward to contacting you again and appreciate your resource. Abby Martin is a visual artist and anti-imperialist journalist. She's the host of Media Roots Radio, creator of the Empire Files, which are great, by the way, and the director of the documentary Gaza Fights for Freedom. So much more that we could say, but we're so glad to have you with us. It's an honor to have you be part of this panel. We're glad it worked out, and we look forward to hearing from you. So you're on.
Thank you so much to Voices for Justice in Palestine for hosting me and for this incredibly important event. I can't wait to watch the whole thing. I wanted to briefly talk about how I became so passionate about Palestinian rights, because it's relevant to why I'm part of this lawsuit in Georgia. Back in 2012, when I was working for RT, I was covering Operation Pillar of Cloud, one of the IDF assaults on Gaza, where they bombarded the Strip, killed 200 Palestinians. They bombed the Al Sharok Journalists Tower in Gaza City, and an RT cameraman's leg was blown off. At that point, an IDF spokesperson, Avita Lebovich, said, we obviously knew there were journalists in the building and that it was justified because of the satellite on top of the roof. And they said, RT had taken a side in the coverage. They explicitly said that my coverage of the atrocities that were ongoing that week kind of justified the fact that a journalist was targeted. And of course, we know that journalists are fair game, as well as anyone in Gaza, that are deemed, enemy territory because Hamas rules the Strip. So this open admission of war crimes was absolutely appalling to me. I just couldn't believe it. And I couldn't believe the distortion of the Western media in depicting this so-called, free and fair democracy that cared about human rights in the Middle East. Going to the West Bank, of course, cemented this for me. It was so much worse than I thought. We're talking about martial law, as we all know. While I was there, I tried to get into Gaza and I was banned by Netanyahu's press office and told that I was a propagandist and an enemy agent of Iran. I'm used to being called an enemy agent of Russia, so I didn't know where that came from. But that's how the Great March of Return, my film Gaza Fights for Freedom happened, where I worked with a team in Gaza, 6 journalists who filmed this incredible epic story about being inside the march. But really what the purpose of it was to document concretely the war crimes that were committed, the deliberate targeting by snipers of several protected categories under the Geneva Conventions: press, children, disabled people, and medics. And that film explicitly encouraged BDS. That was the end point of the film, was to say, what can we do about this? We have to go outside of Israeli society. We have to go to the point of solidarity with the Palestinians who are calling for us as allies to encourage the isolation, the cultural, political isolation of Israel, because that mounting pressure is the only thing that is going to bring down apartheid. And my political work for the entirety of my career has advocated BDS, because I've always understood that Palestinian rights and this issue is just adjacent to my passion for social justice, my passion for anti-war activism, my staunch anti-imperialist lens that I look at everything through in the world. I'm very, very passionate about anti-racism as well. So the advocacy of Palestinian rights is something that is crystal clear to me. It is a deeply held moral belief that I have. And so bringing me to the lawsuit, I was supposed to give a speech at a media literacy conference. Ironically enough, this is something that is supposed to be an academic freedom, right? This issue of, censorship on campus that a lot of conservatives claim affect them. This is really where the fight lies today. The fact that I was supposed to give this speech on campus in February of 2020 at Georgia Southern University, and not even about Palestine. This was just about a speech about the media in general, the construct of corporate-owned media in our world today. I was given the contract that said that I could not receive an honorarium unless I signed away my rights to boycott Israel now and all in the future of my life. I was completely appalled. I had been reporting on the anti-BDS laws. Of course, as we know, they exist in around 30 or so states in the US today. I could not believe my own eyes that I was being given a contract myself as an independent contractor to receive this honorarium. And as we know, which I'm sure has been discussed on the program already, that it doesn't matter who you are. If you are a construction worker, if you are a substitute teacher, if you are receiving money as an independent contractor in any of these states, you are asked to forfeit your constitutional rights in order to pledge loyalty, sign a loyalty oath to a foreign nation. I mean, it was just beyond the pale to me. Of course, I could not renounce my entire political belief system. I refused to sign the contract, and the entire conference fell apart. Now, I linked up with CARE and the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund two incredible human rights organizations to sue the state in March of 2020. I knew that this was a violation of my free speech. I didn't know where to go with it. I felt silenced and I felt isolated. And CARE reached out to me after I tweeted about what happened. And then I just felt completely motivated and empowered, the fact that I could use my story as a vehicle to try to strike down this unconstitutional law. It was an incredible honor to do so. Of course, COVID hit, just a few, I think like the month after I filed the lawsuit. So things have been stalled for a minute. But one thing I think is really interesting that shows you that you're really on the target here is that just a day or two after filing this lawsuit, Netanyahu's Ministry of Strategic Affairs tweeted something that almost seemed to be directly responding to it. Now, I can't say that it was a direct response, but it definitely seems like it was. They basically boasted that they have lobbied state legislatures to pass these laws. They said, quote, "Whoever boycotts us will be boycotted. In recent years, we have promoted laws in most US states which determine that strong action is to be taken against whoever tries to boycott Israel." Now, here we have a foreign nation threatening economic consequences against Americans' constitutional rights. It's just unbelievable. It's beyond the pale and outrageous that people have to choose between their constitutional freedoms and their ability to work in these states in the US. Boycotts have a rich political history. They're fundamental to bringing down oppressive regimes and laws like apartheid in South Africa, like the civil rights era, the Montgomery bus boycotts. This is why the Supreme Court of the United States recognized the right to boycott in 1982 on the heels of boycotts against Jim Crow apartheid in this country. I mean, imagine like the state of Alabama saying you can't work here if you engaged in the Montgomery bus boycott during that time. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's completely egregious. And I think that if you were to ask the average American on the street, they would be completely shocked that these laws exist. Because as was noted, you can boycott the state of Georgia. You can boycott the United States. So why are we signing, fealty over to a foreign country? And the absurdity of it all, with all of this talk about Russia puppeting our political system. I mean, just imagine Israel being replaced with any other country. And the reaction from the political establishment if these laws were just being passed under the radar with anything else replacing the state of Israel as mandating American citizens to not have to boycott in order to work. These laws obviously have to be overturned. We can't trust politicians to overturn these laws. They're more worried about their own political careers despite the constitutional implications of these. And we actually saw how Georgia's legislature brought an Israeli consulate official to try to make my case moot. I mean, render the case moot and throw it out, essentially. And it is just the most open admission of foreign interference. They're actually bringing an Israeli official to the hearing in Georgia. I mean, I just couldn't believe that happened. And I think that judges, luckily have signed on the right side of history here that we've seen in Kansas, Texas, Arizona, and now Arkansas deem this law unconstitutional, which has given me great hope that hopefully Georgia will do the right thing, even though they are trying to vote on rendering it moot. And just to give a little bit more context, I'm sure has been stated, they're trying to increase the honorarium cap for independent contractors to $100,000. So I was going to be given $1,000 to speak at the university. They're trying to raise that to $100,000 so they can still keep the law in place. They still don't want to usurp, this law that has been so heavily influenced by Israel and, of course, admittedly lobbied by Israel. They just want to make it, so people like me can't really do anything about it. Luckily, the lawsuit is still going forward because this is still a complete violation of our constitutional liberties. So even if they do throw this out on the case that they can up the money, the financial givings, we will still move forward with the lawsuit. So two prominent Jewish organizations have also filed amicus briefs to support the case that actually explicitly do not believe in BDS as a solution, which I think shows you how dangerous they understand the criminalization of BDS to be. And, as someone who has been inside 48, as someone who's spent quite a bit of time in the West Bank, I understand that there is no left within Israeli society. I understand that there is no hope from within Israel. I have talked to dozens of Israeli citizens. You don't need to talk to many to understand the genocidal bloodlust that runs through the society and has to in order to dehumanize the population that they're ethnically cleansing still. You need to galvanize support from outside of the country. I mean, leftist is considered a slur. Leftists in Israeli society think that the occupation should be more humane. Anti-Zionists flee because typically they have other passports and stuff like that. They don't need to stay within such a racist, increasingly fascistic society. And that's, again, brings me to why BDS is something that I passionately believe in, why I am suing the state of Georgia because of this deeply held moral compass of mine. And I do think that this is working, of course. I mean, BDS is becoming more popular and is becoming widely internationally recognized as the solution, as the thing that people need to be doing. The divestment campaigns, not only at college campuses, which have been tremendously successful, but all over the world, unions in Britain, Palestinian rights organizations everywhere have been doing this. Look at the artists who dropped out of the Meteor Festival in Israel just over the last few years. They dropped like flies because of the pressure from their fans. I mean, that really says something when Lana Del Rey has to, drop out and all of these other people. And that shows you the success of BDS. It shows you that it is completely untenable for people to associate themselves with such a racist military occupation. They understand the situation, at least peripherally, and they understand that it's not worth it to attach their name to such a state. And just think about how much money Israel has thrown into pinkwashing, pretending like it's this haven of gay rights and liberalism and democracy and paying people. I mean, not only the multi-million-dollar campaign going into pinkwashing society, but paying people with birthright to come and brainwash them and these propaganda tours. I mean, so much money, right? Billions of dollars invested into this idea. But that's what it is. It's an idea, and the idea has run out of steam because people can see the truth with their own eyes. And Palestinian activists, I think, are feeling the brunt of censorship here in the US, which is why these anti-BDS laws are really targeting them, and which is why we see the executive order that Trump left office signing that criminalized, BDS activism on campus. This is the forefront of the free speech issue today. This is the forefront of the civil rights fight today, are these anti-BDS laws. And I really, really like how this event was framed, as the idea that progressive except for Palestine is over. And it has been for a while. Of course, the Biden administration and the corporate owned liberal media from CNN to NPR, they all keep obfuscating the truth and making it seem like you can be on the left, but you can still be Zionist. Look, we all know that that is not true in actual progressive spaces anymore. And it has not been for years. The narrative is not sticking. It does not work anymore because, again, people can see the truth with their own eyes. The advent of social media, it doesn't matter how many war rooms are being activated to correct the record online. Palestinians are filming their reality for themselves, and Westerners are seeing that reality aghast with their own eyes all over the world. And, Israel and its allies have deflected all of this criticism, all of this rightful criticism of their apartheid state, ethnic cleansing and colonization by smearing concerned human rights activists as bigots. That's their goal, right? That's their modus operandi. But that is not working anymore. That is not working anymore. We see that in polling directly. Just look at Democratic polling alone. I mean, you can look at like Bernie Sanders' campaign, even the Jewish, Jewish Vermont senator who was running for president and who actually brought up Palestinian rights several times during the campaign. 4 years prior to that, he barely mustered Palestine. He was actually confronted at a campaign event, and he could barely condemn the assault on Gaza that was happening at the time. And then you fast forward 4 years and he's talking about withdrawing illegal settlements to the 1967 borders and withholding aid and leveraging aid. I mean, that's a testament to the movement. That's a testament to the strength of BDS and the solidarity movement with Jewish Voices for Peace, with activists walking off birthright. Look at the Democratic polling itself. In Gallup's annual polling, they ask Democratic Party voters what their views are on the Israel-Palestine conflict. For the first time ever, a majority, 53%, said the US should apply more pressure to Israel as opposed to Palestine to make compromises. That is huge, right? 53% up from 43% just 2 years ago, a decade ago. This position didn't crack 38%. That really tells you all you need to know. And a lot of these people don't understand how crystal clear the situation is, right? They still think it's complicated and that these are peoples who've been fighting for thousands of years. They don't understand the very crystal clear issue that this is a colonizer, colonized, oppressor, oppressed, right? This is something that's so obvious. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's our goal, is political education, making people realize what the situation is, what the reality is, and how obvious the solution is. How obvious the solution is. It's not anti-Semitic, right? This is a weaponization of anti-Semitism to try to tap down and on rightful criticism of apartheid and actions that can actually take down apartheid and have successfully taken down apartheid in the past. South Africa still exists, right? No one is calling to have Israel fall. People want equal rights. They want democracy. There are 5 million Palestinians who are living under either an open air prison where everything's dictated by Israel, or 3 million people in the West Bank who are living under brutal martial law. Those people deserve equal rights and they deserve a democratic voice. And the only thing that's preventing accountability for Israel is really the United States empire. It's the US empire that has been this sordid, undying alliance that has just provided this staunch shield around Israel and has prevented them from really facing any scrutiny whatsoever. They have their propaganda arm, they have their legal system, as we can see, the laws that have been passed to run cover for Israel. And it is absolutely absurd. The fact that the ICC has finally allowed an avenue of accountability gives us the avenue to build pressure against our own government, because I truly believe, as American citizens, this is why I'm so passionate about this, because my government is subsidizing these atrocities every day with millions of dollars. And it is up to us. It is our duty to act and to organize, because we can organize and build mass movements to link these struggles together, and we can make apartheid fall once and for all. And I want to leave you with this anecdote, is that 15 years ago during the Iraq War, organizing, millions of anti-war activists organized against the Iraq War here in the US, Free Palestine banners were not allowed. I remember being told that this is a different struggle. This is too controversial. We can't, in good conscience, allow messages of free Palestine and Palestinian rights to interfere with the calls to stop the invasion of Iraq. Fast forward till today, you are not welcome in progressive spaces unless you are pro-Palestine. And that's the difference. And again, that is because of the movement. That is because of the work. That is because of the efforts. We can win and we will win. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving me the time.
Awesome. the only thing I can say was you were well worth the wait. We're glad you came. I'm looking throughout the chat and the Q&A for questions, and I'm not seeing many questions. What I'm seeing is a lot of yay, agree, right on, God bless you, protect you, keep going, thank you, thank you, thank you. So I hope you're feeling affirmed. We're so grateful for what you've shared with us. It builds beautifully, as you'll see when you go back to the whole webinar, on Omar's brilliant statement in the beginning about BDS and how it fits into the struggle to decolonize Palestinian minds, certainly to decolonize Israeli society, and to fight back hard against racism and oppression. And then the BDS toolkit presentation from Jeff and Nushin laid out really good concrete strategies for groups to join in the struggle. And then here comes your presentation, passionate and fiery about the importance of maintaining our constitutional rights to boycott Israel and to be part of that struggle for solidarity. So thank you again. It's wonderful. And let me look back. And while I've been talking, there may have been a question or two come in. And while I'm looking, let me just ask you one. I wasn't clear from your answer whether your lawsuit has been structured in such a way that it can challenge the underlying fraudulent principle of the law, regardless of the dollar amount. I mean, in other words, is it more than just you being able to recover any losses? How does it address the fact that now there's this larger threshold which challenges any future standing against the law? If you could just comment a little bit about that, and I'll look for some more questions.
Yes, thank you. That is important. And I was actually really happy to hear from my lawyer, Mara Verheyden Hillard, after that threshold had been challenged and they had tried to throw that out. She told me, no, we're still moving forward because this is much bigger than just a dollar amount, because this is something, the way that she described it and is that they are moving forward with the lawsuit regardless of what they do, because it's you can't put a price tag on your freedom of speech. And so we're going to move forward with just challenging the overall freedom of speech issue, whether or not the financial amount is acknowledged or not, because this is something much bigger than that. So I'm very happy to hear that, because I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. As we know, judges have declared different things, and that's why there is a possibility that this could go ultimately to the Supreme Court. But I am happy to hear that we are moving forward to challenge the underlying notion of the law, with the premise that you cannot put a price tag on losing your speech.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. All right. There was one comment that I suppose speaks for all of us. We were worried when you couldn't join us earlier that something untoward had happened to you. So we're glad to see you up and well and with your full voice in effect. A couple of questions. There was a couple people made the comment that there's all this talk about cancel culture and anti-cancel culture. And someone was wondering, even though it has admitted right-wing elements to it, it's been seized upon by right-wing elements, far-right elements in the United States. You're a victim you have been a victim in some ways of cancel culture. It's just looked at differently. What would you say about that? Is that an angle for highlighting your case and other cases like it, and the whole question of suppressing dissent and weaponizing the anti-Semitism as a way of crushing academic dissent, activist dissent, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think this is one of the fundamental problems today with the conversation around cancel culture, is that, big tech, of course, admittedly, and we see proof of that, purging QAnon accounts and conservative accounts, and of course, Trump. And that's what makes media headlines. But at the same time, pro-Palestine activists and Palestinian voices have been purged, have been targeted, have been censored for a very long time, right? And this is never covered in the same way. And that's why it's so, of course, dangerous to cheer on or encourage this kind of censorship on the tech side. But but that aside, I mean, yeah, of course. But my question is, why aren't we hearing about the coverage of these accounts and these people being silenced? You know, whether it be Facebook or Twitter, this is very clearly happening, and it is very, very much a slippery slope. In terms of just in a broader sense, yeah, absolutely. I mean, cancel culture is something that has been hijacked by conservatives and conservatism, and they've kind of victimized themselves, whether it be Milo Yiannopoulos, you know, not being able to speak on college campuses because he's heckled, or Ben Shapiro, or anyone like that. And they get huge headlines for that, right? But what about these laws? This is the ultimate example and the ultimate, you know, kind of thing about cancel culture is that there are actually state mandated laws in 30 states or so that restrict your constitutional rights. And the fact that those are not covered, the fact that this has been completely done under the radar, I think really tells you everything you need to know, that this is a manufactured debate. And, you know, the ultimate expression of cancel culture is silencing Palestinian voices. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why is that so dangerous to the establishment? That's what censorship is. Censorship is not, you're getting heckled on college campuses, you're getting protested. Censorship is when the state passes a law that restricts your speech, right? That is the textbook definition of censorship. So I am always very quizzical that this is not covered in the way that it should be. The only thing that I can think of is that, again, Israel is such a third rail issue, and people don't want to be brandished with this ridiculous accusation of anti-Semitism that has been weaponized so efficiently that they just refuse to question these things. But it's so obvious to me. I mean, this is just such a violation, just such a clear-cut violation of our civil liberties, that it's inexcusable at this time. And especially now that we see polling has shifted and public consciousness has shifted on the issue. Where are you? You know, are you going to be standing on the right side of history, or are you not going to be? Because it's time to pick a side, and it's time to stand on the right side. And if we don't stand together, we're going to lose. But absolutely, I mean, cancel culture needs to be connected to this. And if that's how people will listen, sure. But my question is the people who already know this is going on and refuse to cover it, and it's just inexcusable.
All right, that's a good and rousing challenge to all of us. And probably a good place for us to wind up. We did see a note in the excuse me, in the chat that Omar had to go to another engagement, but what a great blessing to have him at the leadership level of the BDS movement and with us today on the panel. Also, warm thanks to Jeff and Nasheen for their work on the BDS toolkit and leading us through that, and to you, Abby, for your passion and all the best in the lawsuit. There were lots of signs in the chat of people who are really hoping and praying and advocating for you and for this case. And we all
Mark,
go well.
Mark, I wanted to add one more thing really quickly that I just realized. There's something in Georgia called the Campus Free Speech Act, and it has been passed by conservative legislatures, backed by lobbying forces like the Heritage Foundation and things like that. And what it does is actually say that speech, like Nazi adjacent speech, right, and fascist adjacent speech should be protected, right? So that you have this kind of stark contradiction actually within Georgia itself, that you have this law called the Campus Free Speech Act that protects speech, that we're talking about this, you know, bemoaning about cancel culture conservatives like that, but at the same time, this anti-BDS law that actually restricts our freedoms and prevents us from speaking out about Israel. So it's just quite a fascinating turn of events.
Bringing moral fervor to such a cynical pursuit, which is to completely bastardize the freedoms and the morality inherent in civil rights. Wow, amazing. Okay, we could go on, and it's great that we've had this chance together, and our thanks to all of the panelists for your great help in this presentation. And just to remind everybody to check the websites of the three main groups that sponsored this event, and you can help us do our work with your financial gifts and support, which are warmly welcomed. Also to check Abby's information on the Empire Files, a great place to get more of her, and of course the BDS site. We want everyone to continue in the work of standing up in solidarity with our Palestinian brothers and sisters for freedom, justice, and equal rights. So thanking everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Be safe. Goodbye. Good to see everyone.